My name is Adrian Torres. I am 28 years old and a handyman by profession. I stood in the lawyer's office, my hand shaking as I read the document for the third time. The words blurred together, but the meaning was crystal clear. My uncle Vincent had somehow gotten Dad's house transferred into his name 2 weeks before Dad died. The same house where I'd spent 18 months caring for my father through his final battle with cancer. The same house where I'd given up my apartment, my job, everything, to be there for him every single day. My uncle had visited maybe 5 times in all those months. Now the lawyer was telling me the house was legally his. Vincent sat across the room with his attorney, not even looking at me. His expensive suit probably cost more than I'd earned all last year. I remembered Dad's last words to me, telling me the house would be mine, that I'd earned it through love and sacrifice. But apparently, legal documents meant more than a dying man's wishes. The meeting ended with me walking out empty-handed, while Vincent smirked behind his coffee cup. I had 30 days to remove my belongings from what used to be my home. Moving day came faster than I'd expected. I'd rented a tiny one-bedroom apartment in the old industrial district, the only place I could afford on short notice. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that looked like it had seen better days about 40 years ago. Paint peeled from the hallways, and the elevator worked maybe half the time. My new place had a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a bathroom with tiles that had probably been white once, and a bedroom that fit a bed and nothing else. But it was mine, and nobody could take it from me. I spent that first night on an air mattress, surrounded by boxes, listening to my neighbors argue through paper-thin walls. I thought about Dad, about how proud he'd been when he first bought that house 30 years ago. Now Vincent was already planning to gut it and turn it into rental units. The irony wasn't lost on me. I started my handyman business the next week, mostly out of desperation. I'd worked construction before caring for Dad, so I knew my way around tools and repairs. I printed cheap flyers at the library and posted them around my neighborhood. Within days, I got my first call from an elderly woman named Mrs. Castellanos. Her apartment door wouldn't close properly, and she was worried about security. I showed up that evening with my toolbox, ready to do a quick fix and collect my fee. What I found was a woman in her 70s, living in an apartment even smaller than mine. The building was one of those places where the landlord clearly didn't care about maintenance. Mrs. Castellanos offered me tea while I worked, and we talked. She had a gentle way about her, asking questions that actually seemed interested in the answers. By the time I'd fixed her door, realigned the frame, and replaced the worn lock, 2 hours had passed. Mrs. Castellanos reached for her purse, pulling out a worn wallet. I could see it was nearly empty. She started counting out bills with trembling hands, trying to come up with the $40 we'd agreed on. Something in my chest tightened. Here was this woman, clearly struggling, living in a place that should have been condemned years ago. I thought about Dad, about all the time strangers had shown us unexpected kindness during his illness. The hospice nurse who stayed late, the neighbor who brought meals, the pharmacy technician who helped us navigate insurance paperwork. I put my hand over hers gently and shook my head. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood gift, I told her. Her eyes filled with tears, and she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "You're a good boy, Adrian," she said. "Your parents raised you right." I packed up my tools and left, not mentioning that my parent had just been betrayed by his own brother, or that I was barely making rent myself. Mrs. Castellanos called me back 3 days later. Her kitchen faucet was leaking, creating a small flood every time she turned on the water. I came over after my other job, a gutter cleaning that had paid actual money. Once again, I found myself in her small apartment, this time wrestling with ancient pipes under her sink. She made tea again, and we talked more. She asked about my family, and I found myself telling her about Dad, about the cancer, about Uncle Vincent. I hadn't planned to share any of it, but something about her made the words come out. She listened without judgment, just nodding occasionally. When I finished the repair, she insisted on paying this time. But instead of money, she handed me a small antique compass. "This belonged to my late husband," she said. "He was a ship captain. It's worth more than money to someone who appreciates it." I tried to refuse, but she wouldn't hear it. I left confused but touched. Over the next month, I became Mrs. Castellanos' regular handyman. Every week, something in her apartment needed fixing. A loose floorboard, a flickering light, a window that wouldn't open. Part of me wondered if she was inventing problems just to give me work, but I never asked. Each time, she paid me in unusual ways. Once, it was an old photograph of the city from the 1960s, professionally framed. Another time, a leather-bound journal with blank pages. Sometimes actual cash, but never much. I started to notice odd things about her. Despite living in this rundown building, she had exquisite taste. Her few possessions were all quality items, just old and well-used. She received mail addressed to multiple names, and twice I saw her speaking on the phone in what sounded like very formal, businesslike tones, completely different from her usual gentle manner. When I entered, she'd quickly end the calls. Meanwhile, Uncle Vincent was making his presence known around town. He'd started renovating Dad's house, and he wasn't being subtle about it. I drove past one day and saw a huge dumpster out front, filled with everything Dad had loved. His woodworking tools, his book collection, the garden bench he'd built with his own hands. Vincent was erasing every trace of my father from that house. Word got around about what he'd done, and people started treating him differently at the grocery store, at the bank, at church. But Vincent didn't seem to care. He'd gotten what he wanted. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was planning to turn the house into a high-end rental property, charging double what any local could afford. Every time I thought about it, rage boiled up inside me. But then I'd get another call from Mrs. Castellanos or another elderly neighbor needing help, and I'd channel that anger into something useful. One evening, I was at Mrs. Castellanos' apartment fixing a loose cabinet when I noticed something strange. A manila envelope on her coffee table, partially hidden under a newspaper, had an expensive law firm's logo on it. The kind of firm that handled corporate mergers and estate planning for millionaires. Before I could think too much about it, her phone rang. She excused herself and took the call in her bedroom, but her voice carried through the thin walls. She wasn't speaking like a sweet elderly woman anymore. She was giving someone instructions about property acquisitions and investment portfolios, using terms I'd heard on business news channels. When she came back, she was her usual gentle self again, asking if I wanted more tea. I accepted, my mind racing with questions I didn't know how to ask. Who exactly was Mrs. Castellanos? And why was she living in this building if she clearly had money? The mystery deepened when I started seeing a man in an expensive suit lurking around our building. He wasn't from the neighborhood, that much was obvious. His shoes alone probably cost more than my monthly rent. I first spotted him talking to our landlord, then later questioning some of the other tenants. When I asked Mrs. Castellanos if she'd noticed him, she got an odd look on her face and changed the subject quickly. That night, I saw the same man standing outside Mrs. Castellanos' apartment door, listening. When I approached, he hurried away, but not before I caught a glimpse of a leather portfolio with the same law firm logo I'd seen on her envelope. Something was definitely going on. I knocked on Mrs. Castellanos' door to make sure she was okay. She assured me everything was fine, but I noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she gripped the doorframe. A week later, Mrs. Castellanos asked me to help her move some boxes down to a storage unit. The boxes were surprisingly light, mostly containing papers and files. As I loaded them into my truck, one box tipped over, spilling its contents. I scrambled to gather the documents, trying not to look at them, but it was impossible not to notice. Property deeds, stock certificates, legal documents with millions of dollars in amounts listed, and a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed a much younger Mrs. Castellanos, dressed in an elegant business suit, shaking hands with the mayor at some official function. The caption read, "Elena Castellanos, real estate mogul, donates $2 million to City Development Fund." I quickly stuffed everything back in the box, my heart pounding. Elena Castellanos. I'd heard that name before. She'd been one of the wealthiest property developers in the state before disappearing from public life about 5 years ago. I didn't mention what I'd seen, and Mrs. Castellanos, or Elena, or whoever she really was, didn't bring it up either. But our relationship shifted somehow. She started talking more about her past, though never directly. Stories about her late husband, about building a business from nothing, about learning that money changes people, usually for the worse. She talked about her children who'd fought over her wealth before she'd even gotten sick, about business partners who tried to cheat her, about friends who'd only wanted her for what she could give them. "I got tired of it all, Adrian," she told me one evening as I replaced her broken doorbell. "Tired of people seeing dollar signs instead of a person. So I walked away from it all. Well, most of it." That explained the rundown apartment in a forgotten neighborhood. She was hiding, not from the law or from danger, but from the people who wanted her money. Uncle Vincent's renovation was complete. The house looked nothing like the home I'd grown up in. He'd painted it gray and white, sterile and modern, erasing all the warmth Dad had built into it. Vincent threw an open house to show off his investment property. I didn't plan to go, but something made me drive past. Through the windows, I could see Vincent giving tours, bragging about the upgrades, the potential rental income. I saw neighbors I'd known my whole life walking through, their faces showing what they thought of him. Mrs. Patterson from next door caught my eye through the window and shook her head sadly. I drove away before Vincent could see me. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid with truth. I assumed it was spam and deleted it, but the message stuck with me. Things started happening to Vincent, small things at first. The beautiful new appliances he'd installed began malfunctioning within weeks. The expensive heating system broke down during the first cold snap. Pipes burst in the renovated bathroom, causing thousands in water damage. Each repair cost him more than he'd budgeted. I heard about it through the contractor grapevine. Guys I'd worked with who were now fixing Vincent's messes. They told me it was like the house itself was rejecting him. The garden Dad had spent years cultivating withered and died, even though the new landscaping company swore they were doing everything right. Renters would tour the property, but never sign a lease. There was always some excuse, some reason they couldn't quite explain. The house sat empty month after month, draining Vincent's bank account. I didn't believe in karma, but I couldn't help wondering. Mrs. Castellanos disappeared for 3 days, without warning. Her apartment was locked. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and none of the neighbors had seen her leave. I was genuinely worried. On the 4th day, I was about to call the police when I found an envelope taped to my apartment door. Inside was a note in her elegant handwriting. "Adrian, I've had to go away for a medical appointment. Nothing serious, just routine tests. I'll be back soon. Thank you for caring." There was also a key attached to a tag, with an address I didn't recognize. The note continued, "If I'm not back in 1 week, please go to this address. Ask for Mr. Henderson. He's expecting you." The whole thing felt ominous. Medical appointments didn't usually require cryptic notes and mysterious keys. I spent the next week in a state of anxiety, checking her apartment daily, finding it still empty and dark. On the 8th day, with no sign of Mrs. Castellanos, I drove to the address on the key tag. It led me to a sleek high-rise in the financial district, the kind of building where even the doormen wear suits. The lobby was all marble and glass, with a security desk that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. I felt completely out of place in my work clothes and tool belt. I approached the desk nervously and asked for Mr. Henderson. The security guard made a call, raised his eyebrows at whatever response he got, and directed me to the 23rd floor. The elevator ride felt like ascending into another world. The doors opened onto a law office that screamed old money and power. A receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine smiled at me and said, "Mr. Torres, Mr. Henderson has been expecting you. Right this way." Mr. Henderson's office overlooked the entire city. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of presence that comes from decades of authority. He shook my hand firmly and gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming, Adrian," he said, as if I'd had a choice. "Elena asked me to speak with you if certain circumstances arose." My confusion must have shown because he smiled gently. "Mrs. Castellanos is fine physically, but she's made some decisions about her future, and you're part of them." He slid a folder across his massive desk. "Elena Castellanos is my client and has been for 30 years. She's also, as you may have guessed, quite wealthy. What you may not know is that she's been living in that building specifically to lay low, to see how common people behave when there's nothing to gain. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and something that looked like a legal contract. Mr. Henderson explained that Elena had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 6 months ago. She'd been given a year at most, and she decided to spend it doing something meaningful. After decades of being used and manipulated by people who wanted her money, she wanted to find someone genuine. Someone who showed kindness without expecting reward. She'd moved into that rundown building because it was full of people struggling, and she believed that's where you saw people's true character. She's been watching several residents, Mr. Henderson said, but you're the only one who consistently helped without asking for anything in return. The only one who saw her as a person, not a source of income or charity. He paused, studying my reaction. Elena wants to leave you something in her will. Something substantial. But first, she wants to meet with you one more time. She's at a private medical facility, and she'd like you to visit. The medical facility was nothing like a hospital. It was more like a luxury hotel, with private suites and attentive staff. Elena was sitting up in bed when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "Adrian," she said warmly, patting the chair beside her bed. "I suppose you have questions." I sat down, my mind reeling. "Why me?" I finally asked. She smiled. "Because you remind me of who I used to be, before money complicated everything. You've been hurt, betrayed by family, lost everything. But instead of becoming bitter, you chose kindness. That's rare, Adrian. Rarer than you know." She took my hand, her grip weak but determined. "I'm leaving you my commercial property portfolio. 12 buildings across the city, all fully leased, all profitable. It's worth approximately $8 million. The income alone will set you up for life." I couldn't breathe. $8 million. It was impossible. "But there's a condition," she continued. Elena's condition was unexpected. "You must offer your Uncle Vincent one of the properties," she said. "A free gift, no strings attached. I want to see what he does with it, whether he accepts it with gratitude or suspicion, whether having more wealth changes him or confirms who he already is." I started to protest, but she raised her hand. "I know it seems cruel to you, but it's not about him. It's about you. Can you show generosity to someone who showed you none? Can you offer grace where you receive judgment? That's the real test of character, Adrian. Not how you treat those who are kind to you, but how you treat those who've wronged you." She coughed, and a nurse appeared instantly with water. "You have 1 week to make the offer. Whatever his response, the rest of the portfolio becomes yours. Mr. Henderson will handle all the legal details." I left the facility in a daze, Elena's words echoing in my head. I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision. Part of me wanted to refuse the whole thing, rather than give Vincent anything. He'd stolen from me, from Dad's memory. He deserved nothing. But another part of me, the part that had been shaped by Dad's values and by months of caring for him, understood what Elena was really offering. She wasn't just giving me money. She was giving me the chance to be bigger than my pain, to choose who I wanted to be. On the 4th day, I called Mr. Henderson and told him I'd do it. He scheduled a meeting with Vincent for the following Monday. The property I'd offer was a small commercial building currently leased to a coffee shop and a bookstore, generating about $40,000 annually in rent. Not the biggest or most valuable property, but solid and respectable. Mr. Henderson would present it as coming from an anonymous benefactor who'd heard about Vincent's business acumen. Vincent arrived at Mr. Henderson's office, wearing his usual expensive suit and suspicious expression. He didn't recognize me at first, sitting quietly in the corner. Mr. Henderson presented the offer smoothly, explaining that an anonymous benefactor wanted to invest in promising local business people. The property would be transferred to Vincent's name, free and clear, no strings attached. All he had to do was accept. I watched Vincent's face go through a range of emotions. Suspicion, confusion, greed, and finally calculation. "What's the catch?" he asked 3 times. Mr. Henderson assured him there was none. "And who is this benefactor?" Vincent demanded. "I'm afraid that information is confidential," Mr. Henderson replied calmly. Vincent sat back, his eyes narrowing. Then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Tell your benefactor thanks, but no thanks. I don't accept charity. I've built everything I have through my own effort, and I'm not about to start taking handouts now. The room fell silent. Vincent stood up, smoothing his suit. I know what this is, he said, looking directly at me for the first time. You think you can buy moral superiority. Make me look like the bad guy who takes from the nephew he wronged. Well, I'm not playing that game. He headed for the door, then paused. You want to know the truth, Adrian? Your father promised me that house 30 years ago, before you were even born. He changed his mind later, got sentimental in his old age. That transfer was just correcting an old debt. I don't owe you anything, and I certainly don't owe you gratitude. He left, slamming the door behind him. Mr. Henderson looked at me with something like pity. I'm sorry, Adrian. That must have been difficult to hear. But I felt oddly at peace. Elena had been right. The test wasn't about Vincent. It was about me, about whether I could offer grace even knowing it might be rejected. I'd passed my own test, regardless of Vincent's response. Mr. Henderson handed me a new folder, this one much thicker. With the condition fulfilled, regardless of the outcome, the full estate transfer can proceed. These are the property documents, financial statements, and management agreements. As of today, you own 12 commercial properties in prime locations throughout the city. The current total value is $8.3 million. Annual net income after all expenses is approximately $600,000. The numbers didn't feel real. I'd gone from barely making rent to being a multimillionaire in one conversation. There's one more thing, Mr. Henderson said, sliding a final envelope across the desk. Elena asked me to give you this after the meeting with your uncle. Inside was a handwritten letter. Elena's elegant script filled 3 pages, but one paragraph stood out. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in character. You've proven yours beyond doubt. Use this gift not just to secure your own future, but to be the kind of person who changes others' futures. That's the legacy that matters. Elena passed away 2 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep. Her funeral was small, attended only by her lawyer, a few old business associates, and me. Her children didn't come, hadn't even known she was sick. They'd cut contact years ago, angry that she wouldn't bankroll their extravagant lifestyles. Standing at her grave, I understood her completely. She'd spent her final months not being Elena Castellanos, real estate mogul, but Mrs. Castellanos, elderly neighbor. She'd gotten to experience genuine human connection without the corruption of money. And she'd found what she was looking for, someone to pass on her legacy to, someone who might use it better than she had. I made a promise at her graveside. I would honor her gift by being worthy of it. The first thing I did was buy back Dad's house from Vincent. He was drowning in debt from the failed renovations and empty rental months. My offer was exactly what he'd paid for it, not a penny more. He signed the papers without looking at me. The house renovation took 6 months. I didn't restore it to exactly how Dad had it. Instead, I transformed it into something new while honoring his memory. The Torres Community Center opened on what would have been Dad's 70th birthday. It offers free tutoring for kids, job training for adults, a community garden, and a tool library where people can borrow equipment for home repairs. The handyman skills that had sustained me through my hardest months now help others. I still live in my small apartment, though I could afford much better. The rental income from Elena's properties funds the community center and several other initiatives around the city. Uncle Vincent eventually left town, bitter and broke. I heard he's working construction in another state. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about the property he refused, about the nephew he betrayed. Mostly, I think about Elena and Dad, about the legacy of kindness they both left me. True wealth, I learned, isn't what you inherit or what you accumulate. It's what you give away and who you become in the giving. That's the inheritance that really matters.